Hello and welcome again. I'm out on the Spider still, riding from riding on the Federal Highway, heading north from Canberra back towards Goulburn. And in the last clip you would have seen me turning off a road called Shingle Hill Road onto the Federal Highway, and the sign that said Goulburn 63 kilometres. So I'm still on that journey, and for the part of this clip I'll be riding along Lake George, which is on the right hand side, and you might also notice the ring of hills that are on the left hand side just above where I'm riding. As I said, I'm on my way back to Goulburn, and in the last clip I started telling you some things about Goulburn, and I thought what I would do this time is continue that theme and talk to you some more about things about Goulburn and about the city that I live in. So in the last clip I was talking, I think towards the end of that clip I was talking about the economy and employment in Goulburn, and I said at the time I think that retail and hospitality were probably the major employers. I probably should have included in their service industries, and by that I mean professional services such as doctors, lawyers, dentists, those sort of people, but as well as that hairdressers, beauticians, nail clinics, perhaps even if you think about mechanics and panel beaters, they're in the service industries these days. I'm not sure how you classify those businesses these days, but I think most of it seems to be that they think of those as people providing a service, so they're in service industries. I also said at the time that I thought the biggest employer would have been the New South Wales state government, and I said that on the basis that if you think about, first of all, the jail, and then the police academy, and then police, fire, ambulance and SES people, and then you have health and all the services that are allied services that are associated with that. You have education and all the people who work in schools that are not necessarily teachers but are employed by the Education Department in one capacity or another, be it teachers' aides or counsellors or grounds people or whatever it is. And then you have, as well as that, Department of Community Services, Department of Agriculture and other allied bodies like the Rural Lands Board, I think it's now called. And things like that. I would think that the state government is probably the largest employer of people in Goulburn. As well as that, we're not as big as we used to be. Goulburn did used to be a big railway centre, not as big as it used to be, but still there are people who work on the railways either at the station staff or in rail maintenance of some sort, or as train drivers who live in Goulburn. So that's the state of the economy. The one thing I should mention at this stage in regard to the economy is just based on my own observations rather than any hard data, is that people in the building industry seem to be very busy at the moment. All sorts of tradespeople, that is, let's say carpenters, plumbers, electricians, roof tilers, wall and floor tilers, plasterers, all those sort of people that are involved in the building of homes seem to be very busy. And I say that on the basis that when I'm out running, I go past a number of subdivisions, and there's a new one called Blakely's Run that is in the process where all the earthworks are being done and services and roads and that sort of stuff are being put in, that is going to have an enormous number of blocks in it. But the other ones that I pass all seem to have houses that are being built, and that all seems to be run like a well-oiled machine, in that there'll be a block of land that is for sale, then there's a sticker that says sold on it, and before long the concrete slab is poured for the house, and then a frame arrives and some people come onto the job site and they put the frame up, and then the next lot of tradesmen come in and the next lot of tradesmen and so on, and it all seems to be, like I said, like a well-oiled machine where these tradesmen come in and they do their job, and then they go on to the next job, or they do that job, go on to the next job, come back and finish the one they're doing there. For example, the electricians may come in and do the basic work and then come back and do more elaborate work like switches and power points and so on when the plastering's done and so forth. But it does seem to be a very well-oiled machine, and tradesmen, just based on my own anecdotal evidence, seem to be very busy at the moment. So that's the state of employment and the economy. Moving on, I thought I would talk about education as the next thing. I can't say a lot about preschool and daycare, except to say that there are a number of preschools in Goulburn, and I know there's at least one development application before the council for another one that'll have 120 places. So there seem to be lots of preschool and daycare centres for working, people who have children of that age and they are working. I can't tell you how easy it is to get a place or how many places are available. I just can say that there are a lot of those centres. When it comes to primary school education, that is your children are between, say, about 5 and 12, we're really blessed in our town in that for a town of 25,000 people or thereabouts, we have 7 government primary schools. We have 2 Catholic primary schools, but one of those at the north end of town and one at the south end of town. We have 2 independent schools, one of which is a K to 6 school and the other one which is, I think, a K to 12 campus. We have 2 government high schools, both of which are 7 to 12, and we have a co-ed Catholic high school that is also 7 to 12. So in terms of just primary and secondary education, I think we're pretty well provided for, and there seem to be convoys of buses driving kids all over town to deliver them to various schools. So it doesn't appear to be a transportation problem either. And again, I say that based on when I'm out running of a morning, I often go past the bus depot and lots of buses are heading out, and I see those buses in all parts of town. So they're delivering kids or picking up kids and delivering to schools. As far as post-secondary education goes, there is a TAFE college here. We also have a conservatorium of music, which I think is affiliated with the New South Wales Conservatorium or the Sydney Conservatorium. It's called the Hume Conservatorium, and you can learn instruments there, and they do have performances. We have a country university centre, and that's within the grounds of the TAFE, and from what I can determine about that centre, it is a place where you can go and have some help with study skills or with enrolment in your course or university, perhaps even help with your course fees and HECS or help, or whatever that's called, and maybe Austudy and things like that. They don't actually teach anything. They don't teach courses. There are no lectures. There are no tutorials. But there are these sort of, if you like, ancillary or associated things that go with the university course that they do help out with. We did have at one stage, and as far as I know, we still do have a branch of the University of the Third Age, which was a sort of community organisation that offers courses in all sorts of things for whether perhaps no formal qualifications, perhaps you want to learn about digital photography, or perhaps you want to learn landscape painting or things like that. There are people who give classes in those sorts of things. There are some fees, I think, attached to some of those courses, and as far as I know, it still operates out of the community centre. So I think in terms of education, we're pretty well catered for. And as I said earlier, we're an hour from Goulburn is 1 hour from Canberra, where there are 3 universities. It's also 2 hours from Wollongong, where there is a university, and about 2 hours from Sydney, where I think there are 5 universities, plus many other universities that have campuses, not their main campus, but do have a campus where you can come and take some courses or do classes and things like that. So I think as far as education goes, we're pretty well catered for in Goulburn. Moving on to health services, there seem to be a lot of doctors' practices in Goulburn. That doesn't mean that you can just walk in and get an appointment. I think sometimes you've got to ring up and make appointments. Others of them will walk in and you register at the desk and you sit down and wait your turn. Some of them bulk bill and some don't. Some of them, as well as having mainly GPs, do have some allied health services, physiotherapy, speech therapy perhaps, and things like that. I know that the one out at Bradfordville, which is called the Health Hub, they often have visiting health specialists. For example, like an ophthalmologist might come, or a neurologist might come, or a neurologist might do a telehealth consultation with a patient out there rather than come to the site. But I think we're reasonably well catered for in regard to that. It may be that in some cases that the doctor that you see refers you to someone in Canberra, or refers you to someone in the Southern Highlands, because there are specialists who have offices in Bowral or Mossvale or places like that, that you might be referred to as well. In, I think, mid-2023, the new Goulburn-based hospital opened after about 4 years of construction. And attached to that, but not yet open, is the ANU Clinical Practices Unit, I think it's called, give it its correct name. And although it's not open yet, what I assume is the function of that is that students who are at the ANU School of Medicine will be required at some time during their training period as doctors to come to the clinical practice unit here in Goulburn and provide medical services. Exactly what sort of medical services I don't know, because the thing is not open yet, and I guess people will find that out as the centre opens, becomes operational. I must say I'm very fortunate in terms of my health that I don't have a lot of call for the health services of any sort. So what I'm saying here is sort of general observation, and your personal experience may be different. You might find that the doctor that you like to see isn't there, or it's not as easy to get an appointment as you want. I know you can't just walk into the dentist and sit down and see a dentist. You have to make an appointment, and sometimes that appointment may be months unless it's an absolute emergency before you can get to see one, but that's just the nature of those sorts of businesses and how they operate. So that's health services. Again, I think we're pretty well catered for in terms of that. Now, in terms of what is there to do in Goulburn, well, that often depends on who you are and what it is you want to do. It's almost a cliche for some people to say, oh, this town, insert the name of whatever town it is boring and I can't wait to get out of it and there's nothing to do here. On the other hand, there might be lots of people who say, well, there's plenty of things to do here. It's just you have to decide what it is you want to do or what things you're interested in. We have 2 festivals a year coming up in the second weekend in March, so I think it must be next weekend, is the Rose Festival. And it's exactly what it says, a festival of support of celebrating the rose flower. And we have a rose garden in the park that is directly across the road from where I live. But then there is also a display in the basketball stadium, so that'll lead me on to sport in a moment, but in the basketball stadium of all sorts of roses, and there are judging of the best rose, and I'm not exactly sure what goes on there, but I know that it's a big deal for people who are interested in gardening and roses and so on. For this second weekend, it's held annually on the second weekend in March every year. Obviously, if it's annual, it's every year. We also have the Lilac City Festival, which is held on the long weekend in October. Long weekend in October is often known as Labour Day because it celebrates the day when the working hours of Australian men, as it was then, were officially set at 8 hours a day, and a public holiday was granted to recognise that day. And so that long weekend is when many country towns have their festival. For example, in Grafton there's the Jacaranda Festival, and in many other towns there. In Bowral there's the Tulip Festival, in Goulburn there's a Lilac City Festival. So you have carnival in the streets. There used to be a parade down the main street, shops all decorate in lilac colours, and there's a Lilac City Queen and all sorts of functions like that. But so those are sort of general recreation things to do. We have a couple of amateur theatre groups. In fact, one of our theatre groups, the Leader Theatre, or Leader Tafel to give it its proper name, is one of the oldest theatre groups, theatre companies in Australia. I think it was founded in about 1891 and has been operating continuously in Goulburn since then. But we have at least another, I think they're called the Rocky Hill Players, and there was at one stage a Gilbert and Sullivan Society. So there are a number of amateur theatre companies if amateur theatre is something you're interested in. We have a multiplex cinema which has 4 screens, and they generally get the big movies that are released at the multiplexes in Sydney and other major urban centres. So we get the big pictures and the blockbusters that come out from the major studios, and they sort of do their time here the same as they do in any other theatre. And we also have a performing arts centre. The performing arts centre is the old, used to be the town hall, and it was converted into performing arts centre, which seats about 400 people, and it hosts comedians, live music acts, and other sorts of theatre, dance, and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, for example, will be performing here later on this year in a selection of music and so on. So again, depending on what your tastes and interests are, if you're interested in those sort of things, there are plenty of opportunities to do that. There are a couple of large licensed clubs, the Workers' Club and the RSL, and they did used to have live music, but I don't think they have quite as much of it these days now that the GPAC, as it's called, Goulburn Performing Arts Centre, is open. But they do have the other sort of things that you'll find in licensed clubs, cheap meals, drinks and poker machines. Now, as far as sport goes, I don't have any children now who are old enough to play sport, or my children are all grown up. And none of my grandchildren live in Goulburn, but in my time when my own children were young and interested in playing sport, there is a multitude of sports available in Goulburn. Excuse me. The four major football codes, that is round ball football, AFL and both codes of rugby, are catered for in Goulburn to varying degrees. When I say to varying degrees, I know there is an AFL team, but I don't know if they have any junior teams or not. The AFL team plays in a competition that is based around the southwest here of New South Wales. So they play sometimes in Canberra, they play at places like Harden, I think, and so on. And sometimes they have teams that come and visit them and play them here. The round ball or soccer, or we used to call it football, is a very big competition here, both for juniors, and then there is a men's and women's competition, and then I believe there is a more elite level of, or a higher level of competition, I probably should say, where some representative teams play in the ACT in competition there. There is rugby league, but around about under 15s, I think most of the players play in competitions that are organised through the ACT, would be under the banner of the Canberra Raiders, but not necessarily part of the Canberra Raiders setup. And then there is rugby. I don't know if they have any juniors or not. Their team used to be called the Dirty Reds, and as far as I know still is. And they have their own oval, Simon Portivan Oval, where they play their games. Hockey is a big sport for both men, women and juniors. Netball is a big sport for women. Basketball has its own stadium, and it's a big sport for men, women and juniors. There are tennis centres, there are 2 golf courses, there is a road cycling group or club, there's a track cycling club, and the track cycling is based at the velodrome, which is in the oval across the road from me. That is floodlit, and I think I'm right in saying their competition is conducted from September through to March on the track there. So there is a fair bit of sport if sport is your interest. Trying to think of other things that I might tell you about Goulburn, and other things that you might be interested in. If you're interested in heritage and history, then Goulburn has a lot of historic buildings. Some of the more standout ones would be the courthouse, which is in Montague Street. It is quite a magnificent building from the outside. I can't tell you much about the inside. There is the post office, which is in the main street. There are Anglican and Catholic cathedrals, which are both imposing buildings. There is the Goulburn Historical Society's museum, which is called St Clair, which has had a number of uses over the years, but before it became the archive for the Goulburn Historical Society, it used to be a school at one stage, a school for young ladies. And there's quite a lot of historical buildings throughout Goulburn. One street in particular, Grafton Street, which is sort of one street to the east of the main street, has a lot of buildings that have some historical significance about them, in the sense that in each of the buildings, not every building in the street, but a lot of buildings in that street on both sides of the street have brass plaques in the front yard somewhere that tell you something about either the particular building that's there now, or the buildings that had been on that site and at previous points, or the use that particular land or area had been put to at some other point in its history. In the centre of town is what's called Belmore Park. Now, at one stage it was called Belmore Gardens, but it's now known as Belmore Park. And it is also a sort of time capsule in many ways of the history of Goulburn, because all over the park there are plaques that recognise historic events in Goulburn's history. For example, right in the middle of the park is a huge oak tree that's called the Lady Belmore tree, and it recognises the day that the then Governor of New South Wales and his wife Lady Belmore came to Goulburn for the opening of the railway. So the railway track from Central to Sydney, to Central to Goulburn, had finally been completed. I don't know how long it took them to get here, but it would have been probably a day. And they arrived at the station, which is just a sort of block down from where this Belmore Park is. They came to the park. I guess there were sort of speeches and the usual things that happened those days, and this tree was planted, and the tree's still there. There are a number of others, as I said, plaques in the park that tell you about events in Goulburn's history. And in Market Street, which is the street that runs down one side of the park, there are also a number of historic buildings that talk about events in the history of Goulburn. Well, I think that's probably giving you a bit of a Wikipedia thumbnail sketch of Goulburn and its history. And so thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my commentary, and if not, I hope you've enjoyed the scenery. There's still a bit more scenery to go. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to know about Goulburn that I haven't mentioned, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section, and if I am able to answer your question, I will. Thank you for watching. Feel free to comment, as I said, and pass it on to your friends and so on, and I'll talk to you when I'm making the next video in this series.